All right. Next up, we have altcoins. So, what are altcoins? Altcoins stand for alternative coins. Bitcoin being the original, altcoins infers everything other than Bitcoin. As of right now, there are over 10,000 different altcoins. But before we get into the thousands and thousands of like smaller coins and project coins, I'd like to talk about just some of the major coins. So probably the most recognizable and the one you've heard the most about is called Ethereum. So Ethereum is an altcoin that took the basics of Bitcoin, but they actually added a layer of programmability to it. So Ethereum is called the EVM, the Ethereum Virtual Machine. And with Bitcoin, when you made a transaction, there was a little space that you could put on each transaction to put a little kind of message in the transactions. Well, Ethereum recognized like, oh, we can put a little message in the transaction, but what if instead of just a message, we actually make that message code? Well, that's the root, that's like the basics of what Ethereum is in the transactions on the Ethereum network, they implemented a little bit of code to it. And then utilizing the currency of the Ethereum network, which is called Ether, they enabled projects and individuals to write what are called smart contracts, which is executable code within the transaction. And depending on how complicated the computations required for that smart contract are, a certain amount of what's called gas, which is a little bit of ether, is required in order to execute that contract. So that's the basics of Ethereum. But what Ethereum also did was it created a new type of token standard. And that token standard is called the ERC20 token standard. And what this enabled was for creators to issue their own tokens on the Ethereum network, to give them their own names, to create a set number of the tokens, and then be able to send the tokens from one wallet to another, these subset tokens on top of the Ethereum network. And this is what's called a layer 2 solution. The ERC20 tokens are considered layer 2. Bitcoin is considered a layer 1 solution. Ethereum is considered a layer 1 solution. ERC20 tokens are layer 2 solutions. So, Ethereum is like the major, it's probably the most well recognized altcoin, but there are other ones as well. Where Ethereum made things kind of smart, there's other coins that were created before Ethereum that weren't smart like Ethereum, but were more like Bitcoin, but just had different variances to them. So there was a coin called Litecoin, for example, that had a little bit of a change. Instead of 21 million, like Bitcoin was, they made 84 million. Instead of 10-minute block times, as it's with Bitcoin, it was 2.5-minute block times. Instead of a 1 megabyte cap in terms of the space per block, they made it to 4 megabytes. So Litecoin was effectively Bitcoin times 4, which was interesting and it worked pretty well. And then we had another coin called Dogecoin, which is one of my favorite coins, which it moved away from having a very strict it has from having a deflationary inflation, if that makes sense, an inflation rate that's systematically having every 4 years. Instead, with Dogecoin, they chose to keep it as an inflationary currency, but with a fixed block reward size. So every time there's a block, I think it might be 10,000 Doge. And so it's going to always be 10,000, unless there's agreement with the network to change that, but as it is, that's the way it is. So there's not going to be this finite cap of Dogecoin. It's going to continue to be created. Then there are other coins. We saw privacy coins emerge as well. So there's a privacy coin called Monero. So with Bitcoin and Ethereum and Dogecoin and Litecoin, every single transaction is visible, is public. Every transaction can be seen on the blockchain ledger, and you can trace the origins of all of the transactions, where they came from, where they went to. But with Monero, they added a layer of privacy to it. So you have confidential transactions. So they got the benefits of the blockchain, and like the benefits of Bitcoin in terms of being able to send it to anybody. Anybody can spin up a wallet. They're immutable transactions. But with Monero, the difference was you can't have full transparent traceability, which is very enticing to many users who are very privacy centric. Then there's another one called Zcash, which was doing the same thing. There's these privacy coins. So this kind of represents this like snapshot, and then we've seen like more and more and more projects coming out and launching tokens. Almost all of the large exchanges have a token. Binance, for example, one of the world's largest exchanges, launched the BNB token. Originally, it was an Ethereum token, but then they actually created their own clone of Ethereum called BSC, the Binance Smart Chain, where they enabled projects to create tokens seamlessly, and they basically just took what Ether was doing and made their own version of it. And there are certain throughput limits to the Ethereum network, and when you take the Ethereum network and then you create the Binance network, then you basically got 1 + 1, and then you got a total throughput of 2 across both those networks. So we've seen a lot of development across both of those both those platforms, and there's more and more coming. Now, I think I'll save it for another video, but of what we want to look into when we're looking and evaluating projects and what determines, the price. I think that's probably the natural next step, is evaluating price. What determines price for coins? So this has been a snapshot of the different types of altcoins in the ecosystem. Bitcoin was the first, but now there's thousands and thousands of thousands of them, and many of them have a lot of value as projects. Oh, and before we get to that, I just also want to say there's Bitcoin, but then there's also forks of Bitcoin too. So there's Bitcoin Cash, and there's Bitcoin SV, and there's Bitcoin Gold. And what happened with all of these was they decided there was because Bitcoin is an open source platform, there was this decision, or there was some contention amongst the developers that some developers didn't like where it was going, and they thought they had a better idea for how Bitcoin should run. And they weren't able to get support of the whole network. So what they did was call a fork. So basically, the Bitcoin chain was running along, and then all of a sudden it forked, and then there's two chains afterwards. There's Bitcoin, and we'll use Bitcoin Cash, for example. And Bitcoin Cash, they changed some of the amount of transactions that could be in each block. And some people liked that and some people didn't. But the key thing was that if you had one Bitcoin before the fork, after the fork, you had one Bitcoin, which would be BTC, and then you had one Bitcoin Cash, which is named BCH. So everybody who had the Bitcoin, and then after the fork, they actually get one of each. And same with all the other versions. Whereas Litecoin or Dogecoin, they started their own chain entirely. So anybody who had Bitcoin, they didn't have any Dogecoin or Litecoin. But with forks of coins, there's been a fork in Ethereum as well. Now there's Ethereum, there's Ethereum Classic. So again, in those situations, if you had one, like a pre-forked coin or token, then post fork you'd have one of each. Just a little tidbit about how all these amazing coins and how this ecosystem works, and I hope that's helpful. But now let's get into what determines price for the tokens.